Teachers, what is the funniest reason you've sent someone to the principal? I had a 6th grader. Let me set the scene. This kid is the human incarnation of Ralph Wiggum, who wanted to get out of class so desperately that first he raised his hand and said his ears were ringing and he needed to go to the nurse. Sorry kid, not falling for it. 20 seconds later, he raised his hand and said his tongue was burning and needed to go to the nurse. Not falling for it, Ralph. 10 seconds later, he had blurry vision. He was squishing his eyes with his hands. No dice, Keith. And then, in the grand finale, he stand with a flourish and yells so loud that teachers all down the hall stuck their heads out into the hallway. My penis is bleeding. We all stood mouse agape until the one smartass in the class adds, and you want the nurse to look at it?
That kid definitely wanted out of class. It's wild how creative some kids can get when they're trying to skip out. I remember a friend back at school faking a stomach ache to leave math class. The teacher saw right through it, though. We all just sat there, waiting for the show to end. It's funny how desperate we were back then, even if it meant making up wild stories.
Not a teacher, but a classmate in my drafting class was sent to the dean for 3D rendering a massive dong. My teacher saw it, commended him for his work, and asked him to print it out. He then stapled it to a referral and sent him to the dean. Glorious. For clarification, a referral is bad in this case, and we printed things in 2D back then and liked it.
That's a wild story. I can see how a classmate could take things to that level, especially in a drafting class. The teacher's reaction is pretty funny though. It's like he appreciated the creativity but still had to follow through with the referral. Kind of a mix of admiration and discipline. That type of stuff definitely makes for memorable moments in class. Never a dull day in drafting.
Not a teacher, but we had an older lady as a science substitute in 8th grade. It was a hot June day and the windows were open. We were on the 2nd floor. My friend told the sub when she walked in the classroom that Jimmy had fallen out the window. When the sub looked out the window, she saw Jimmy laying on the ground, contorted, and she passed out. We never got a chance to explain to her that was joke. He had just laid down on the sidewalk under the window. The 2 boys got suspended, and that sub never came back. Edited to add, in New England, it's not uncommon to go to school through June, especially if there are a lot of snow days. Teacher ended up fine, just decided she didn't want to put up with us punks anymore.
That story is wild. I can imagine the panic in that moment. It's funny how a simple prank turned into a whole situation. Kids really know how to push boundaries. I wonder what the sub thought after she found out it was just a joke. It must have been a mix of relief and frustration. Definitely a memorable day for all of you, but I guess she just had enough of the chaos.
I'm a male 5th grade teacher. One of my boys yelled out right before the 3:15 bell rang, "Everybody be quiet. I have an erection." I was like, did he just say that? The way he said it made me giggle like a schoolgirl. Luckily, no one noticed me turn and bust out laughing. No one else seemed to really notice what he had said. The bell rang to go home, and I call him over. I asked him if he knew what an erection was. Very innocently, he said no. Then I thought, oh great. So I said, do you know what a boner is? Of course, he says, no. I could tell by his face that he wasn't lying. So I said, well, it's when your private parts get hard. Right when I said that, he got this very scared look on his face and said, I promise, I didn't know that. Like I said, I could tell he wasn't lying. I had a very hard time keeping a straight face. He said his friend had yelled that out once, so he thought he would. I told him he can't say those kind of things, and he has to be careful with what he says. He walked away very embarrassed. I laughed and laughed when he left the room.
That sounds like quite a moment. Kids often say the most unexpected things without realizing their implications. It's funny how innocent they can be, yet at the same time, you have to keep it together as a teacher. I can imagine how hard it was to maintain composure. It's moments like that that stick with you, reminding you how unpredictable and honest children can be. Just a typical day in the classroom, really.
Girl got so drunk that she locked herself in the bathroom. We found her and obviously had to call her parents to come take her home. We kept telling her, "Listen, it's your dean and you have to unlock the door." She kept responding in the horrible, drunk teenager voice, "No, you listen. I'm your dean." It was very difficult for us to not break down in laughter. Stupid kids.
That sounds like quite the night. I've had a few friends pull similar stunts, where the drunk logic just doesn't make sense. You try to help them, but they just keep insisting on their own ridiculous version of reality. It's tough to stay serious in those moments. You just want to support them but also can't help but laugh at how silly they are acting. Good times, I guess.
I worked in a computer-based classroom at one point where students took many of their classes online. Some tried to cheat the system by copying and pasting short phrases into all the fill-in-the-blank or essay responses, hoping it'd glitch and pass them through. Quickly discovered one student had just been pasting homo, homo, homo into all his responses, which backfired pretty well in one particular instance. Q. Copy the words that apply to you. A. Homo, homo, homo.
That's pretty funny. I can imagine the teacher's confusion reading that. It's wild how some students think they can outsmart the system like that. I guess it's a reminder that shortcuts don't always work out as planned. Sometimes you just end up with a more hilarious situation than you expected.
First year of high school, got sent to the principal's office by my near-retirement teacher for breaking dress code with my t-shirt that had drug references / paraphernalia on it. Funny part is when the principal had to explain to my teacher that Billabong is a legitimate clothing company name and nothing more.
That's kind of a classic high school moment. You think you're just trying to express yourself, but then you end up in trouble for it. It's funny how sometimes adults don't get the context. Billabong isn't even about what they thought. That mix-up probably felt awkward at the time, but looking back, it must be a good laugh. Shows how clueless some teachers can be, even with simple things.
In 6th grade, during a school mass, my buddies made up a thing called Wiener Whack Wednesday. Self-explanatory, go around nut-tapping everyone. Well, our really hot teacher caught 2 kids doing it, and we had a whole lecture our next period. She asked if any of us knew anything about it, and all the girls told the teachers what was up. Every single guy in our class, 15 at the time, small Catholic school, got called to the office. We had to take turns talking to the principal and explaining that none of us were gay. And she made us call our parents. I was really freaked out that my father would think that I was gay. He beat my ass that night. Edit, just realized my name checks out. That was unintentional.
So, in 6th grade, my friends and I started this weird thing called Wiener Whack Wednesday. Basically just nut-tapping each other. We got caught by a teacher, and it turned into a whole lecture about it. The girls ratted us out, and we all had to explain ourselves to the principal. I remember being scared my dad would think I was gay. Ended up getting in trouble at home too. Kinda wild times.
Kid walked into my room. "Mr. Spod's son, I got a joke you will love. Is it school appropriate? I think so. Here it is. Why are Catholics glad Jesus was crucified and not stoned? I don't know why. Because now they do this, he makes the sign of the cross. Instead of this, he starts punching himself randomly all over. Okay, you have to go tell that one to Mr. the Dean. Dean laughs his ass off too and sends it back to class. To this day, it is my favorite joke."
That kid had a solid sense of humor. It's cool how he turned something serious into a joke that lightened the mood. The way he performed it must have really sold it. Getting the dean to laugh too shows it was all in good fun. Sometimes, a little unexpected humor is all you need to brighten the day. Glad to hear he shared it with someone who appreciated it just as much.
not a teacher, but the last time I was sent to the principal's office was over a live chicken in high school. The high school I went to used the 8-block schedule system. My last period teacher was afraid to the point of hilarity of birds. We had chickens at home, and since they were 4-H chickens, they were quite docile. I put one in a duffel bag one morning and then put it in the top shelf of my locker. They will just sleep if it's dark, so once last period came, I just put it in the bag. She was used to all of us bringing bags in since it was last period, and when she got up to put the attendance slip on the door, I just took it out of the bag and put it in the middle of the room. Hilarity ensued, and I spent the next day playing Pokemon in suspension in the cafeteria.
That's a pretty funny story. Sneaking a chicken into class is wild, especially with a teacher who is scared of birds. The image of a chicken just chilling in the middle of a classroom must have been chaotic. And getting in trouble for it, then spending time playing Pokemon in suspension sounds kind of chill. Definitely a memorable way to recall high school days.
I didn't even send the kid, I was too amused. I asked one of my students to come smash a giant ass spider on my desk. Being 9 years old, he walked up with an impressive swagger, trying to show all his friends how bravey he was. He took one look at it and whispered, "Oh fuck." I was the only person who heard him, so I just stifled my laughter and told him I wouldn't write him up if he killed it. He did, and was the talk of the lounge at lunch.
That's a pretty funny story. Kids can be so dramatic, right? This kid tried to act tough but then saw the spider and just couldn't handle it. It's cool that you kept it light and let him know he wouldn't get in trouble. Sounds like he became a little hero for a day. I would have enjoyed seeing his friends react too. Not every day you get a story like that in class.
Not a teacher, but as a 5th grader. 2 friends and I were playing with the jump rope during recess when the playground attendant walked up and asked if she could show us something. Now, this was a fairly large woman, and I had my doubts in her jump roping abilities, but we were 10, so who were we to say no to an adult? She takes her place in between the 2 girls, and with the first revolution of the jump rope falls flat on her face. My friends, and I along with the 10 or so other kids in the vicinity, start to laugh uncontrollably while she struggles to peel herself off the ground. Humiliated at having embarrassed herself in front of a bunch of little kids, she yells for everyone that laughed to go to the principal's office. So a dozen or so kids go marching off to the office. When we tell the principal why we're there, he immediately starts laughing. The kind of red-faced, silent laughter that takes about 2 minutes for him to get under control. Finally, he says, "You all can go back out there," and tell her I'd have done the same thing. I never saw her again after that recess.
This story reminds me of when I was in 5th grade too. We had a substitute teacher who tried to join us for kickball. She was pretty uncoordinated and ended up tripping during her first kick. We all laughed, not trying to be mean, just kids being kids. She turned red and walked off the field. Later, the regular teacher came back and said it was fine to laugh at mistakes. It was a weird but funny day.
Band teacher here, I had a 7th grade trumpet student who was doing a playing test in class. She was an absolute sweetheart. Short, nice girl whose trumpet was about half her size. She starts to play and makes a mistake. "Shit," she exclaims. Plays a bit more shit. This continued throughout the excerpt. I must say it was the most heartfelt shit I had ever heard. Following the test, I said, "Dear, did you realize you cussed after every mistake?" Her response, "Oh shit." Well, the whole class was looking at me like, "What are you going to do?" I asked her to sit in my office, and I will deal with it after class. Class ends, and I go to my office and smile. I told her she shouldn't use those words, but I'm very impressed with how much she progressed and cared. I didn't send her to the principal, but I was proud of her because she actually gave a shit.
That's a pretty relatable moment. Kids can be so honest and uninhibited. It's cool that you handled it well. Instead of being strict, you acknowledged her effort and progress. It's important to foster a supportive environment, especially for kids who care about what they're doing. It's moments like these that show their personality shines through even during mistakes. Good teachers know how to balance discipline with encouragement.
Not a teacher, but in 8th grade science class, I witnessed greatness. While in the lab, my partner asked the teacher what would happen if he pulled the safety shower lever, and the teacher said that nothing would happen. 5 minutes later, my partner pulled the lever, and of course, a waterfall erupts from the shower head and spreads all over the lab. The teacher looks shell-shocked as everyone is laughing hysterically. She then screams, "Josh, go to the office now."
That sounds like a classic school moment. It's funny how curiosity can lead to chaos. Teachers often have to deal with unpredictable situations like that. I remember a similar incident where someone accidentally set off a fire alarm during a group project. It created a huge mess, but everyone ended up laughing about it later. Those moments definitely stick with you. Just a reminder of how unpredictable school can be.
Not the principal's office, but we had a friend, let's call him Steve, get written up for in school suspension. "Steve, why'd you get written up?" Says nothing. Hands me the slip. Reason for 2-ND write-up. 8 first detention slip. He vomited a lot later. Edit people keep making a Mac reference. While this next statement might change the course of my upvotes, I never really watched Always Sunny. I get the reference because Google.
That's a pretty wild story. Steve really took that detention slip to the next level, huh? Eating it seems like something you'd only see in a movie. And then to top it off with a vomit session, that's just rough. It's funny how those little moments can stick with us, though. Makes you wonder what else happened that day that nobody talks about. Just a typical school experience, I guess.
Students sighed. I don't know if this is funny or not, but when I was in 4th grade, I told the teacher's assistant that she had nice boobs. She thought she had misheard me, so she asked what I had said. By this time, the other students had quieted down to listen. I said, "You have nice boobs." I don't know what I was expecting with all my 9-year-old wisdom. She just grabbed my arm and walked me straight to the principal's office while explaining that this could be considered sexual harassment. My mom ended up picking me up and pretending she was upset with me until we left. Then, as we're driving away, she chimes in, "Well, if I was her, I would have just taken it as a compliment." Edit. Wow, my first Reddit gold. Thank you.
That's a classic kid moment. Sometimes kids just say what's on their minds, not realizing the consequences. The whole situation escalates so quickly, though. It's funny how the teacher's assistant took it seriously, and the principal's office became the next stop. It's cool that your mom had a different perspective afterward, kind of lightened the mood. It shows how adults can sometimes overreact. Kids have a funny way of seeing things.
I was a substitute teacher for a year after undergrad. One time, I was subbing a 6th grade math class at a local school that didn't used to be a bad school. Well, it was 4th period and the kids were starting to get loud, so I told them to settle down. As soon as I did, a girl jumped up, said, "You are not our real teacher, Mr. O," and started twerking at the front of the class. So I had to send a 6th grade girl to the office for twerking.
That sounds like a wild day. Kids can really test the limits, especially in middle school. It's funny how they feel like they can act however they want, especially when they think a substitute isn't as strict as a regular teacher. Sending a student to the office for twerking is so unexpected. You've got to keep a straight face in those moments, though. Just part of the job, I guess.
This happened today. By the end of class, I had enough of 2 of my 10th graders being disruptive, so I asked them to go outside the last 15 minutes of class so I could actually wrap up the lesson without interruption. I was going to leave it at that until one of them grabbed his skateboard and hopped on and rode it across the carpeted classroom and out the open door. He got suspended.
Sounds like a solid move to get some peace in class. It's tough when students decide to push limits. The skateboard thing? Probably not the best call on his part. Suspension might teach him a lesson, but also makes you wonder if kids really think it through sometimes. At least you got to finish your lesson without chaos for once.
I had a student this week who was being disruptive and wouldn't stop, so I told her she could go sit in the hall. Her response? I can do your mom. Like what? What kind of answer is that? This one isn't so much funny as just plain stupid, but I once had an 8th grader stand up in class and tell everyone that he was high and had smoked pot before coming to class. Obviously, he was being sarcastic, but I had to sit in the office anyway. The worst part was that it was only October, and he was already on his 3rd or 4th suspension. Think before you speak, kid.
It's wild how some students think they can just say anything. That girl really took it to another level with her response. And the 8th grader, man, that sarcasm just isn't the move in class. Suspensions pile up fast, especially this early in the year. You'd think they'd find better ways to express themselves. Just shows that some kids aren't getting it yet.
Not a teacher, but this one kid did something pretty dumb. One day we had a test in one of our classes, and he decided to skip. That teacher always had the window by her desk open, and this kid went up to the window, pulled down his pants, and got up in the window. I'm actually impressed at how quiet he was because nobody noticed him. All of a sudden we hear, PSSSD, Miss Beep Beep, and this kid rips one in her face. Everyone was laughing, and she didn't know what to think of it.
So, this kid thought he'd be funny during a test. Instead of sitting in class, he pulled down his pants and climbed up to the teacher's window. It's wild he managed to stay quiet. Then, out of nowhere, he let out a loud fart right in front of her. Everyone lost it laughing, but she seemed confused about what just happened. Classic moment that got talked about for a while.
Not my story, but a friend of mine is a teacher at a school for troubled kids, and she had this one kid. Man, I wish I could remember more stories, but this one always stood out in my mind. Jimmy stands up and opens the window. Jimmy, why did you open the window? It's hot in here. A few minutes later, Jimmy puts his backpack on. Jimmy, where are you going? It's too hot in here, gotta get some fresh air. And then he leaves through the window he just opened. Jimmy, you can't leave until class is over, and you can't go out the window. It's a 2nd-story window, so she and the rest of the class get up and run over to the window. They see him running away, and everyone is dying laughing. Jimmy was always trying to get out of class.
That's pretty classic. Kids always find a way to be creative when they want to escape. It's interesting how he chose the window instead of just walking out the door. I mean, he's clearly got some determination. Your friend probably got a good laugh out of it, even if it was a little chaotic. It's those kinds of moments that really stick with a teacher, I guess. Just shows how kids think outside the box sometimes.
In my NQT first probationary year of teaching, I had an awful class of year 9s, 13, 14-year-old. I flipped out one day at one kid for just being generally arsey. I sent him out without a good reason. He was just being in utter, general pain. Me, screaming, student, go to head of department and tell her you're an idiot. Student leaves room and goes to head. Head, yes. Student, to head, I'm an idiot. Head, okay. Student returns to my room. Me, sit down.
I can relate to that. You have those days where everything just gets under your skin. It's tough when you don't handle it the best way. I remember losing my cool once too, telling a student to go to the principal. They come back looking confused, and you can't help but feel a bit bad about it later. But hey, it happens to the best of us in teaching.
Not a teacher, but as a student I got kicked out of my 8th grade English class because I kept talking to the girl behind me. I was just hanging out in the hallway leaning against a locker, and I straight up fell asleep. I was fully standing up against the locker and just went to sleep. Well, once the class ended, the teacher was the first one out of the room, and she saw me and put her hand on my shoulder. I must have been dreaming something scary, caused the act of her Putting her hand on my shoulder scared the most ear-shattering fart out of me. And that was the first time I heard a teacher curse, saying, "What the fuck?"
That's a classic middle school moment. Getting kicked out for chatting is pretty common, but then falling asleep while standing is a whole different level. The reaction must have been hilarious, especially the teacher's surprise. You definitely made an impression that day. It's wild how some of those awkward moments stick with us, even years later. It's like one big awkward memory we all can relate to at some point.
This might get buried, and I'm by no means a teacher, but I was in class when my teacher told the class that as a kid he had a crush on Pocahontas. That is when my fellow classmate looked up and asked, "Did you want to Pocahontas?" My teacher laughed and laughed, then looked up and said, "I have to give you a detention now, edit, Hontas. Damn Grammarly."
That's a classic moment. Teachers have their funny stories too, but when a student cracks a joke like that, it's hard not to laugh. Detention jokes are always a bit of a double-edged sword, though. You get a laugh, but then there's that aftertaste of consequences. Still, it's those kinds of moments that stick with you, making class a bit more memorable. Sometimes the jokes are just too good to ignore.
I'm not a teacher, but when I was in 10th grade, we had this kid that didn't take school seriously. He had an aide and everything, and he was sent to the principal about twice a week. Him and the teacher had a conversation like this. Ms. Childs asks, "Are there any questions?" Cal stand up and says, "Yes, Ms. Children, is the..." Ms. Childs cuts him off. "It's Ms. Childs." Kim replies, "But Childs is bad grammar." A visit to the office ensued.
That's the kind of kid I remember. There was always one. They didn't mean any harm, but somehow, they just stirred things up. I mean, the way he would challenge the teacher? It was unexpected. The principal probably knew him by name at that point. Just a funny reminder of how school had its moments that weren't all about textbooks. It made staying awake in class a bit easier, I guess.
Not a teacher, but a classmate of mine walked into a science lab with the rest of the class. Noticed it was a substitute teacher who barely paid attention and proceeded to climb out of the window. He then walked around and came back in through the door, apologizing for being late. The teacher didn't catch on until the 6th or 7th time.
That's a pretty wild story. I had a friend pull something similar in high school. He pretended to go to the bathroom but would sneak outside for a smoke. The teacher never noticed until a classmate told on him. It became a running joke. You'd think they'd catch on after a while, but I guess teachers can be pretty out of it sometimes.
That reminds me of this one time my son, 9 at the time, and his friend, 10, were in the backseat of the car talking about random boy stuff video games, whatever. I'm not paying much attention to them, but I randomly hear one of them insult the other, because that's what boys do, by calling him a labia. I butt in and ask if either of them knows what labia means, and they're all like no, I guess not. So I told them. I couldn't help but bust into laughter at the disgusted looks on their faces. There was another time they started talking about penis cannons. I'm still not even sure what that is.
That's classic kid behavior. They just throw out words without knowing what they mean. I remember a similar moment with my cousin. We were just joking around, and he called me something random. I asked if he knew what it meant, and he had no clue. The confusion on his face was priceless. Kids just have a way of making ordinary moments funny without even trying. It's all part of growing up.
We had a strict dress code in my high school as well. We couldn't wear band shirts with suggestive content, even if it was the name of the band. For example, Slayer. Apparently, if you wore a Slayer shirt, it meant you were going to shoot up the school or something. No hippie jizic, etc. Anyway, I got away with wearing a shirt that said EFFUCKYOU on it. I know when my teachers got it, he read it and chuckled, but I think the rest thought it was song lyrics or something.
That makes sense. Schools can be pretty strict about dress codes. It's interesting how certain shirts get targeted more than others. Your approach to bending the rules is clever. It's always a bit of a gamble when you test the limits like that. Sometimes, you find a way to express yourself without crossing too many lines. It's nice to get a laugh out of it, even if it's just from one teacher.
I went to a Catholic high school, uniform and all. We had a casual dress day. I rocked up wearing a hoodie with a huge cartoon leaf running from the cops. Teacher immediately goes, "Take that off." So I take it off, and underneath I'm wearing a t-shirt with a zombie torso held up on meat hooks, holding its eyeball out on its palm. Teacher immediately goes, "Put it back on." And it just shook his head. Edit, I also had a Billabong shirt that just said, in bold caps, "Bong."
That's a solid story. Sounds like you definitely knew how to push some buttons with your outfits. The teacher's reaction really shows how some things can be fine one moment, and way too much the next. Casual dress days can be tricky like that. It's funny how certain shirts can just create chaos, even if you're just trying to express yourself.
My Russian instructor was studying abroad in Russia, and her class went to some memorial graveyard in St. Petersburg. For those of you who don't know, St. Petersburg was Leningrad. The graveyard was a memorial of the Leningrad blockade. My instructor's whole class had no idea what the battle meant for Russia or knew much of the battle itself. Her teacher was pissed off and made everyone write an essay on the battle and the Great Patriotic War. The teacher never looked at my instructor or her class ever again.
That's a pretty memorable experience for the instructor. It's wild how some people can be so disconnected from important historical events. That teacher really took it seriously, though. Having to write an essay after a wake-up call like that must have been a challenge. It's one of those moments that sticks with you, showing how crucial it is to learn about history, especially in a place so tied to it.
Oh man, we had this in the engineering building. I was a TA, and this kid was playing some flash game rather than doing whatever design project he was supposed to be doing. So I'd wait until he was just about to beat a level and ever so slightly screw him up. He didn't know I had this ability, so he was getting crazy frustrated. Seeing him get visibly frustrated, I went over to his desk and said something along the lines of, "I know the program can be hard to learn. Let me see what you've got so far and I'll help." Oh, the shame he had when he turned high screen and didn't even have SolidWorks or whatever open.
That's a pretty classic moment. Being a TA, you kind of see everything. This kid was so focused on that game, totally ignoring his project. The look on his face when he realized he wasn't even doing the right work must have been priceless. It's weird how some people can get so caught up in distractions. At least you tried to help him out with a little tough love. Makes for a memorable teaching experience.
I found out that when the computer was logging into Windows on my account, I could right-click the process and close it before it started on my computer. Proceeded to play Zelda on Project 64 for 2 hours. 5th and 6th hour were same room, same PC. I would walk up to ask teacher a question about that work and notice to show my username, but with a black screen. She never really cared. I got 100 in her class easy mode.
Sounds like you had a clever workaround there. Sneaking in some gaming while keeping up your grades is a solid strategy. I had a similar moment in school, just managing to blend work and play. It's funny how sometimes teachers overlook things when you're doing well. Just a laid-back day of multitasking.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.